from the National Catholic Register. This is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
As the nation prepares to celebrate the 4th of July, beloved songs like God Bless America, the Star-Spangled Banner, and America the Beautiful will be sung from sea to shining sea, and even in some of your parishes. This week on Register Radio, we salute the country's lyrical legacy with Register reporter Joe Pronechen. But first, it's another busy week in Rome, and we talk to Register Vatican Correspondent Edward Pentin about the Church's newest cardinals, the trial of the former Vatican diplomat, and the Pope's trip to Geneva. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register and co-host of Register Radio, and I'm joined by Matthew Bunson, the Register Senior Editor and co-host for Register Radio. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, always good to be with you.
So what should we talk about most in this in the Rome report?
Well, I think intercommunion comes to mind. We have another one of the Pope's press conferences returning back to Rome, which raised a lot of eyebrows. And then, of course, we have the trial of Monsignor Carlo Capella. So summers used to be very quiet in Rome, but not anymore.
But first, we'll start with the Cardinals. So, hello, Edward. Welcome back to Register Radio.
Hi, good to be with you folks again.
And of course, Edward, on Thursday of this week, the Pope named 14 new cardinals. They were there in Rome to receive this new title. What do you believe the message is that Pope Francis is sending to the Church with the selection of these 14 cardinals?
Well, it's rather similar to the ones he's said before, which is really that he's chosen cardinals who are not particularly expected. They're often from the peripheries, and he wants to go and get to elevate prelates to the College of Cardinals who are on the peripheries, often from developing countries, from poor areas, those areas where the Church is growing fastest. So there's quite a heavy weighted number of cardinals who come from the South, the global South. And that's been very much in keeping with all of his consistories so far.
Is there any of the cardinals in this mix that have really just brought, I guess, a surprise to people and maybe have been talked about more than others?
Yes. Well, there's been various ones. I mean, one of the big surprises was that Archbishop Konrad Krajewski was elevated to the college. He's the Pope's almoner. He's been a Polish prelate. He's been right. Very, very strong in very, very sort of loyal to the Pope in helping the poor. He's done a lot to reach out to the poor in Rome, particularly. And the Pope's elevated him to cardinal. He wasn't expecting that at all.
Okay.
But there've been others too, and there's some interesting ones, particularly in Latin America. There's, of course, Bishop of Peru. There's an Archbishop in Peru who's very strong on ecology. That's obviously a subject very close to the Pope, something he's very interested in, especially with the Pan-Amazonian Synod coming up next year. There's also a Bishop of Bolivia who's been under the spotlight for controversy, which he's denied. That he has a wife or mistress and children, but he's denied that. But certainly that's sort of cast a shadow over that appointment. But others are also very interesting. There's Archbishop Ladaria, who's the prefect of the Congregation for the Adoption of the Faith. That position is traditionally held by a cardinal, so that's not a surprise there. And also the Vicar General of Rome, Archbishop de Donatis. That is also a usual appointment. But also another surprise in the Curia was the fact that Archbishop Giovanni Becciu, who's the Sostituto in the Vatican Secretariat of State, which is a very important role, basically running the Curia, he's been elevated to the college, but also made prefect of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. So he's being sort of promoted but moved out into another Vatican dicastery. And we don't know yet, although we may over the weekend, we may know who his replacement is, but at the moment it hasn't been announced.
It's interesting, too, that the Holy Father chose Luis Rafael Sacco, the Patriarch of Babylon, especially coming on the heels of the last consistory where he named Mario Zanari, a cardinal who's the apostolic nuncio or papal ambassador to Syria. So the Pope seems very concerned about the state of affairs in the Middle East, isn't he?
That's right, Matthew. That's a very important point, because that's another sort of aspect of the peripheries. He's gone to elevate those prelates who are very much in the thick of the persecution of Christians in the Middle East. And yes, he elevated the nuncio, I think, in the last two consistories ago. And now we have the Patriarch of the Chaldeans in Baghdad, and they're very happy about that. The Iraqi Christians, they feel that it shows that they're not forgotten, because often they feel the West has forgotten them and the plight and the suffering that they're facing. So they're very pleased with that one.
Well, taking on a less palatable or appetizing topic, of course, we had a Vatican Court this last week sentencing Monsignor Carlo Capella, a former Vatican diplomat, to 5 years and a fine, I think, of 5,000 euros for possession and distribution of child pornography. It was striking in his testimony when he referred to all of this as, quote, a bump in the road of his priestly ministry. That took a lot of us by surprise who cover this sort of thing. What are you hearing in Rome about all of this?
Yes, well, it's really it's just the latest in what they're trying to do is trying to obviously root this out and stop this from happening. But it's and I think this has just been I think they're quite pleased that this has happened and that they've brought this particular priest to justice. But one hears, one hears these stories quite a bit, these things going on, but no action being taken. So the fact that this has come to a conclusion, I think, has pleased a lot of people here. Some are perhaps think that the sentence was perhaps too lenient, but others think, well, they're glad that he has been brought to justice. So I think it's just the latest in a sort of part of the sort of curial reform and trying to clean it up.
And of course, another event that has happened involving the Pope is his trip on June 21st to Geneva. He was there for the World Council of Churches, meeting with the World Council of Churches. And really, I mean, from my perspective, the news that kind of came out of that gathering really happened on the papal flight afterwards and the interviews that the Holy Father gave. So I guess what became of this meeting in Geneva and what were the highlights of the whole trip?
Well, it was really much as expected. It was very much a chance for the Pope to underline the push towards unity, the importance of ecumenism. He spoke very much about the inclusivity of the faith, and that we are all, we're all belonging to the Christian faith, and that we all should be one. So it was very much a sort of a reminder of that. There was sort of some concern because the Pope has been very almost, some people think, perhaps going too far on this issue, and they were concerned that he might ask for the Church to join the World Council of Churches, which would be quite a revolutionary step, given that the body is really made up of Protestants, and the Catholic Church has never been a part of that, never been a member of it, but it has been an observer of it. But he didn't do that. But he was very, very sort of reaching out to those who are separated and trying to underline the importance of pursuing ecumenism and not giving up on it. I think he was very strong on stressing that, and that he thinks that this is a venture that's worth continuing, and I think this is very much in keeping with what he said last year, particularly when it was the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. Right. I think he was just trying to sort of tied that up, really. Concluded that, I think.
And of course, on the flight home, he was asked a question about intercommunion, and he gave his thoughts, really some very personal thoughts. We got to hear the mind of the Holy Father on intercommunion. And then following later in the week, the German bishops met. So there's more to report on intercommunion, and you've recently done a blog on that, updating our listeners and readers on that topic. So what's happening? What did the Pope say on intercommunion, and then what happened with the German bishops who met this week?
Well, on intercommunion, he expressed his concern about the fact that if the German Bishops' Conference had decided to give this handout, to produce this handout, then it would be basically of significance to the Universal Church. So he said that it should really be up to the individual bishops to decide whether Protestant spouses should receive Holy Communion. And in that way, he said, well, it's not a universal thing. It's really up to the individual bishops and up to the Protestant spouse and the accompaniment that's given to that spouse to decide whether or not they merit receiving Holy Communion. But there was some concern with the words he said, because he said that it's not so much the content of the pastoral handout that he was concerned about, but that fact that it becomes universal, that the Bishops' Conference approves of it. Now, some people are concerned about that because they say there were flaws in that handout. It was too lenient, it was too open, really, to Protestant spouses. It didn't really define what grave necessity means, which is in the canon law, and that only those spouses who have a grave necessity to receive the Eucharist can do so. And that has never been really properly defined, and it still hasn't. But now we've heard that the German bishops have issued the pastoral handout. It's not under the Bishops' Conference's name, but it has been issued. So essentially it's gone ahead.
Right.
But it's now up to the individual bishops to decide. So I think it's still a problem, I think, for a lot of people who had reservations about the handout.
Sure.
And I don't think those are going away.
Of course. And in some of your reporting, so your blog that you published this week on the 27th was German bishop released new intercommunion statement. And in that blog, you have the former head of the Congregation for Doctrine of Faith telling why he thinks this is a bad thing to have been published in the German church. And of course, in a previous blog, you had written about the current head of the CDF, Cardinal Ladarius, who said that who you found out really was disappointed and really frustrated over this German statement altogether. Didn't want to see it published, but did have a compromise in that he said, okay, it's fine for individual bishops. So I don't think this is the end of this file. No. I think we'll hear a lot more from you on it in the future, and hopefully maybe we can hear more from the new cardinal, head of the CDF, on this. Thank you so much for what you do there in Rome, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Sure. Good to be with you as always. Thanks.
When we come back, we'll talk to Register correspondent Joe Pronechen about the songs of the 4th of July. This is Register Radio. More when we return.
Have you heard who's reading the Register? Why, it's Tim Staples.
The National Catholic Register gives you the world's news like no other. Only NCR has a stable of writers steeped in good Catholic theology and philosophy to give you the news with proper perspective.
For a 3-month free subscription to the National Catholic Register, go to ncregister.com and click on the 3 months free banner, or call 1-800-421-3230.
Welcome back. This is Jeanette DeMello, the editor-in-chief of the National Catholic Register, and I'm joined, as always, by Matthew Bunson, my co-host and senior editor for the Register. And this segment, we're joined by Joe Pronechen, staff writer for the Register, who wrote a wonderful article recently called Singing in Praise of America's Blessings. And this article so far has only run in print. It's not yet online. So you're going to get a little bit of a preview in this segment of an article that'll run on the 4th of July. It ran in print on June 24th edition. And of course, this article is about hymns, mostly hymns anyway, that celebrate our country. And the particular one that I really wanted to learn about was God Bless America. And this was for a particular reason, because it's the 100th anniversary of this song. And so Joe has a lot to share with us about the details of that song and many others. So Joe, welcome to Register Radio.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to be here, Jeanette.
So this is a rather unique piece. It's not something that we've done in print before, exploring hymns this way. What made you want to write this piece?
I thought of, I was looking for something to write for, patriotic type of article for the Memorial Day and 4th of July and everything coming up. And then this struck me, and one of the things is that in the St. Michael hymnal, which we use in our parish, there are a number of hymns, America the Beautiful, America, My Country 'Tis of Thee, as we call it. These are listed in the St. Michael hymnal, which is a Catholic hymnal. And so I wanted to do a little research, where these came from and why they're so popular and how they relate to our faith. So I thought that once I start looking into that, it became fascinating. In fact, a priest that was at our parish before he was transferred to a parish down the line last year, for 10 years, almost every weekday Mass that he had, he would end with God Bless America. We had to sing during the week. It's kind of versed in these patriotic hymns, and once I found out quite a bit about them, I wanted to share that with our readers.
Yes, and a few years ago you did write a blog on the subject that did really, really well. So when you proposed this during one of our editorial meetings, I thought it was a really good idea. And of course, a big focus of the story is on God Bless America, and that's because of the anniversary. So tell us a bit about the origins of that song.
It's a fascinating history because Irving Berlin wrote it in 1918, actually as a song that would conclude a show that he was writing for troops before they went overseas, and he himself was in the U.S. Army. This was in toward the end of World War I, of course, when the United States was still quite embroiled in World War I. But he decided to pull it from the show at the last minute, and nobody ever heard it. And he put it in his trunk. And the reason why, he says, it just didn't seem to fit. He had said everything he wanted to say in that show, and it was a song about war at that point. It was war-oriented. And it just sat there in his trunk along with several other songs until 1938. When Kate Smith, who was then the most popular female vocalist in the United States and had one of the top radio shows, weekly radio shows, asked him for a song to sing for Veterans Day, then known as Armistice Day, and she wanted to sing it the eve of Armistice Day when her show came on. So Berlin went to his trunk. He knew he had God Bless America there, and he pulled it out, and he had to brush up the lyrics, though, he said, because they were a few of them had to be changed because they were more about fighting on land and foam, and he wanted to make this a song of peace, he said, instead. And in fact, he also wanted it to be a prayer, even though he didn't say that, because he wrote a verse to it that introduces a song. And you don't hear it too much, but it's 4 lines long, and it ends with the phrase, as we lift our voices in a solemn prayer. And then it goes into God Bless America.
And so, that really brings me to a question. You mentioned at the start that some of these hymns, these songs that we recognize from things like baseball games and other symphonies and things like that when we're celebrating our country, are also found in hymnals. And so, what is it that makes these things fitting for Mass? I know you spoke to several people who are liturgists or who actually do the music for liturgy, directors of music. What did they have to say about the use of these kind of hymns? I mean, these kind of patriotic songs as hymns?
Yes. Basically, they can be used as hymns because they, first of all, the patriotism involved. And if we look at the Catechism talks about patriotism and how we are supposed to be patriotic. Number 2239 to be specific, and it says patriotism is a natural virtue we're expected to exercise as good Christians. And one of the chaplains I talked to, a Navy chaplain who is now the vocation director for the military archdiocese, had said that we're supposed to follow that as a natural virtue. I'm sorry, the Catechism says the love and service of one's country follow from the duty of gratitude and belong to the order of charity. So it's a matter of charity. He said that Eternal Father is the Navy hymn, and the Navy, he said, sang that during Mass at every Sunday Mass they had. So that's quite interesting. And another reason is not just the patriotism, but these particular songs always mention God and ask God for some favor, blessings on the land in some way or other, or thank God in some way or other for blessings on our country. For example, in America the Beautiful, we know that phrase, America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. And it has another beautiful verse in it that sometimes is skipped simply because of length. It's the third verse, I believe, and it says, America, America, God mend thy every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty and law. So they come down to being prayers, actually, combining, asking God's blessings on our country.
It's neat that you mentioned that last verse, because when I was editing your story and I was doing a little bit of research about these hymns that are sung at Mass that are also patriotic songs, I remember seeing some criticism over it, over the use of these patriotic songs, because sometimes maybe it obscured the prayer. That it's not just saying, hey, this country's so great, God has blessed us, but that it's literally asking God to bless us. And then that verse that you mentioned about mending our flaws is really important. I wish it would be sung more, because it distinguishes the difference between just unbridled patriotism, but really dependence on God.
In fact, the music director at the Basilica and Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington said it's quite proper to use these hymns, such hymns as these, at the end of Mass. You wouldn't necessarily use them during Mass itself, but the recessional hymn. He says that's a proper place for it.
And if I remember correctly, he also said it's as long as these hymns don't distract from the true occasion, the celebration of the Mass, the Eucharist, and the reading of the Gospel and all of that. So I remember he made that important point that these aren't meant to be distractions, but really to aid our worship and dependence on God.
Yeah, Joe, I have to ask before we run out of time here that you provide the origins of so many of our great songs, but what are your favorites?
Oh, my favorites. Well, God Bless America is there, and then America the Beautiful comes in, a close second. My Country 'Tis of Thee. I would say that would be about fourth. Faith of Our Fathers. I love that too. So I put that as a close second. We'll put it in third, so I don't have any ties here. I'll put it in tied with America the Beautiful. And that's interesting because that was written by a Catholic priest, and it wasn't meant to be a patriotic song for America. It was a Catholic priest who, he was an Anglican clergyman, came into the Catholic Church right after Cardinal Newman, and it was a month apart, and he knew Newman and worked with Newman at the in London. And he wrote it as a hymn in memory of those Catholics that were persecuted during the time of Henry VIII and Elizabeth. And when it came to America, it just became a patriotic hymn for us. And in fact, it's quite interesting because one of the verses was changed. They were asking in the third verse for Blessed Mother's blessings, and of course, when the Protestants picked it up here, they didn't want to. They had to change it to just faith of our fathers instead of Mary's prayers. They put faith of our fathers.
So I wanted to ask you particularly because one of you cover three hymns in detail in this story. America the Beautiful it was originally a poem.
Yes, the woman who wrote it, Catherine Lee Bates, intended it as a poem. There's no indication in anything I researched where she wanted it as a song. But people start putting it to music, and then she started looking around for a suitable melody for it. And she ran across this melody in 1904, a hymn called Materna, which was also translated as Mother Dear Jerusalem. And the man who composed it, the composer, died in 1903, so he never, Samuel Ward his name was, and he never heard his music put to this America the Beautiful, this poem, but it took off. Once people heard it as that, it became, in a sense, our unofficial national anthem. And people did want to make, by the way, God Bless America our national anthem, but Irving Berlin refused the honor. He says, no, it shouldn't be.
Oh, interesting.
He felt that we should keep what we had.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, I found it a fascinating story. I love the details that you gave, that you really just don't hear these details, and especially the details about Kate Smith, who first sang God Bless America, and her Catholicism. She converted to Catholicism and was a very active member of her parish, and so you give us some wonderful details. I do remember, Joe, that there was this sidebar of other interesting facts about other patriotic hymns that did not make the print edition. And so I think you should publish that as a blog, and we'll give a little teaser to our listeners that you'll have another blog, including other hymns that are worth our attention, as they are patriotic and also prayerful. So, Joe,
wonderful! I will certainly do that.
But thank you for your creativity on this song, and we wish you a very happy 4th of July, and we wish the same to all of our listeners. Thank you for joining us on Register Radio, and remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com, and don't forget to go to the podcast. So if you look for Register Radio on our homepage, you click on that and you get our podcast. So thanks for joining us here on Register Radio on EWTN. For Matthew Bunson and our producer, Jeff Burson, I'm Jeanette DeMello. Until next week, God bless you and happy 4th.
For mountain majesties above the fruited plain, America, America, God shed His grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. From sea